All right, welcome into Surviving Paradise, the podcast that takes a sometimes serious, oftentimes humorous look at the claim by Jehovah's Witnesses that they are living in a modern day spiritual paradise. I am your host, Stacy Bauman, former elder, ministerial servant, most importantly, a kid raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses in the 1970s and 1980s. A quick warning, we try to have fun here. We're also trying to heal. Lots of emotions. It runs the gamut. Sarcasm, humor, and more are all mine. Please note that it is never meant to offend. I'm in full recognition that people are in different places in their journey in or out of Jehovah's Witnesses, and we just try to provide a safe place for all people. And we like to laugh. That's just the facts. I was a fatherless kid, and I've stated on this show many times in the past that I was raised by a single mother. It's no secret that the lack of a father in the home tends to impact kids much differently. It's not ideal. I want to say that at the outset. But looking back at my childhood, my brother and sister seemed to miss that relationship more than I did. It always kind of puzzled me. It's not like I didn't miss it at all, but I didn't have the deep sense of loss or emotions that I sensed they had. I am, after all, a firstborn son, firstborn kid. Might I add at this point that Kenneth Lehman's book on birth order is fascinating and interesting. I really dug it. Check it out. And jumping back in, without making this all about me, hindsight has taught me that I was likely parentified in some ways, just being the oldest, which likely impacted my own feelings on all things male figure in the home and, of course, absence of male figure in the home. I have to say, though, that I'm extremely lucky to have a loving, generous, kind mother. Probably the biggest blessing of my life, without question. And my brother and sister are also phenomenal people. Not an accident. It's all due to mom. But without that father figure present in my life, Jehovah God, the invisible guy in heaven, he became my father figure. It wouldn't even be fair to say that that was by default. I did have a brother in a congregation growing up that really I became very, very close to. He has since passed on, which is devastating to me to learn. We weren't speaking, obviously, but he acted really as a loving father figure for many years as well and became a dear, close friend, even though at the end it was strained and not good. But in reality, it was my invisible sky daddy that impacted most of my views on fatherhood. I've said before, it was the more loving aspects, I guess is the best way to say it, of God, of Jehovah, by means of his son Jesus and the example he set, that impacted me. It included books, in reality, I was an adult during this time period, books like Draw Close to Jehovah, for those that remember that book, or The Greatest Man book. It was those two books that really spoke to me, that had the deepest emotional impact on me. They were really simple books, but they took a little deeper look at the warm and fuzzy parts of Jehovah as a father and his son Jesus and how he emulated him. I know this is going to shock no one, but this also raised a lot of questions in my mind regarding Jehovah as a father. I know there's people rolling their eyes. It's often the subject or a mention in the show week after week. But one that has always caused confusing questions for me was this issue of organization. First, I've shared that I love the concept of teamwork, bringing together a whole bunch of different personalities and genders and people from different cultures and colors, and you name it, bringing them together and watching them work together in perfect synchronization to accomplish a goal is something I absolutely love. I'm fascinated by it. I think it's incredibly powerful. It's also why I truly love American football. As cheesy as that sounds, 11 guys on one line doing all different things to make the goal come to fruition. It's incredible. But the concept of organization is altogether something different and always was. Sure, there are similar elements. I get that. But they're really not the same. Nowhere was this more evident to me than during my life as a Jehovah's Witness. And few things made me question Jehovah more than the claim that he needed us more than we apparently needed him. Make no mistake, that is what is taught to Jehovah's Witnesses. For me, I was looking at my father figure, wondering and trying to figure out why the Almighty, the same guy that created the stars, DNA, the beach, the universe, you name it, claimed he somehow needed an organization to get anything done on this planet. I could never marry the thought. It was strange to me. From the time I was a little boy to a grown man, I can't tell you the nights I spent in prayer or just thinking and meditating, Jehovah, why exactly do you need an organization to get this message out about saving us all from this impending death and mayhem that you yourself control? Why do you need an organization printing magazines and books that most people will never read to explain the book you yourself had written, that book called the Bible? Why do you need to pay for and show up to a building 3 times a week as a witness, or you're going to be unhappy with us or me? Why do you make us wear suits and ties? That was a big one. Since Dodger Stadium or the Cow Palace or the Tacoma Dome aren't exactly temples in Jerusalem, why does my mother have to stress herself out trying to save money to pay for a hotel room for 3 days every summer to listen to stuff I've already heard? Why do you need an organization? And I have to tell you, as I aged, I read the Bible and I studied. I was that guy. I enjoyed it. My questions just got more serious, especially since the word organization cannot be found anywhere in his instruction manual. It's nowhere to be found in the Bible. Nowhere. And yet I'd been hearing the following types of messages my entire life. From the Watchtower of July 1st, 1973, page 402, we get this, quote, "Consider too the fact that Jehovah's organization alone in all the earth is directed by God's Holy Spirit or active force. Only this organization functions for Jehovah's purpose and to his praise. To it alone, God's sacred word, the Bible, is not a sealed book." End quote. One of my favorites. How about another? The Watchtower, February 15th, 1983, page 12, gives us this, quote, "To receive everlasting life in the earthly paradise, we must identify that organization and serve God as part of it." End quote. And then finally this one. The Watchtower, November 15th, 1981, page 212, quote, "Come to Jehovah's organization for salvation," end quote. The concept of an organization and the one I was told I needed to dedicate myself to, you remember the baptism questions, was now life or death. As I aged, it only created more questions. It didn't stop my questions. But as I mentioned, the questions just got more serious. When did Jehovah's need for an organization begin? What was his first organization? Please tell me I wasn't the only one thinking these thoughts at some point in my journey as a witness. I know I couldn't be alone. When was the first one? Why did he need it? Would I be able to find this all-important messaging around an organization in his perfect instruction manual written only for the guys leading this organization? And then, as time went on, I became a ministerial servant and an elder, where the really troubling questions about this subject began for me. Why is Jehovah's organization a hot mess? Where is all this Holy Spirit I've been hearing about? Why are children in danger in this organization? Didn't he clean this stuff up back in the Old Testament by slaughtering pagan nations that did similar things? Why is it alive and well in my time? Dangers to kids. There were many, many more questions, especially as I became a shepherd and elder. But you get the idea. And perhaps you're a Jehovah's Witness dealing with some of those same questions at this very moment. I'd encourage you to stay for this episode. Hang out with us. Because it was a large part of the reason I bailed on the only father I ever knew and his crutch, otherwise known as the Organization of Jehovah's Witnesses. If you go back to the beginning of this multi-billion-dollar organization, you immediately find some very interesting things. I want to emphasize here that every single person listening in who may doubt these facts should, how do I say it, make sure of the more important things as they're commanded to do at Philippians chapter 1 and verse 10 by actually, please, doing some very basic research to confirm that what I'm sharing is true, using your own literature or other secular references that don't come from mentally diseased apostates. Please, take it seriously. Take it seriously. This is important. But back to my former father and his need for an organization. Jehovah apparently decided to start his organization in the 1870s. Isn't that interesting? They were first known as the International Bible Students. It's at this point that I can vividly remember one of my earliest questions on this subject. Who exactly was Jehovah's organization before that? Before 1879? It's a valid question, folks, and I know many people who come in contact with Jehovah's Witnesses have had it. Look at us, using the brains Jehovah made for us in his image. It's important to do. And he must be proud because that is a very good question on all things organization. Who was his organization before the 1870s of the 19th century? You see, Jehovah's Witnesses teach that Jehovah has always, and I mean always, had an organization. One organization. They continue to tell people he has always had at least one organization, and he has had an organization from the beginning of time and space. From the You Can Live Forever in Paradise on Earth, page 192, we are told this, and I got to tell you, this is the book that impacted my life. I was in high school. I don't remember the exact year it came out, but this is the book I really got serious about being a witness in as a senior in high school. I was going to get married to be a witness. You Can Live Forever in Paradise on Earth, page 192, told my young brain this, quote, "The Bible shows that Jehovah has always guided his servants in an organized way. The nation of Israel was called Jehovah's congregation. If you were a true worshiper of Jehovah back then, you had to be part of that congregation of worshipers, not separate from it. Did Jehovah ever use more than one organization during any period of time? In Noah's day, only Noah and those with him inside the ark had God's protection and survived the floodwaters. Also, in the first century, there were not two or more Christian organizations. God dealt with just the one. There was just the one Lord, one faith, one baptism of Ephesians 4:5. Likewise, in our day, Jesus Christ foretold that there would be only one source of spiritual instruction for God's people. End quote. And there it is. Jehovah, the Father I thought I knew, and the Almighty God has always had an organization. He's always had one. Despite the naked people in the garden never mentioning that they were, president and vice president of his organization on earth or any other title, we are to believe it's what Jehovah has always put in place. This is what witnesses are taught. Even more weird when they listen to a talking snake, they ate some fruit, and his earthly organization went from a total of 2 people to, what, 0 in the blink of an eye? Was it imaginary until Abel showed up and then got killed himself, back down to population 0 in Jehovah's organization? All questions I had. Maybe these are things that are making you think about this concept. And why exactly did Jehovah speak to that apostate Cain and murderer Cain? Did the organization of that time approve? All questions a witness should ask when they claim that Jehovah has always had one organization. Especially when it comes to the Garden of Eden. Apparently, he started out with 2 people, went down to 0, bounced back up to 1, went back down to 0. Very puzzling stuff. And listen, using just that quote from the Watchtower, I couldn't be more excited. They mentioned one of my favorite guys in the Bible. Everyone knows my love for Noah. They get a lot of mileage out of that part-time boat builder zoologist guy, with everything he ever did pointing, of course, to them. And that actually includes the ark he built itself. Did you know? From the Watchtower of 2006, May 15th, page 22, "Are you prepared for survival?" is the article. We are told this, quote, "During the final period of the ancient world that perished in the flood, Noah was a faithful preacher of righteousness. In these last days of the present system of things, Jehovah's people are making known God's righteous standards and are declaring good news about the possibility of surviving into the new world." Note this, quote, "Just as Noah and his God-fearing family were preserved in the ark, survival of individuals today depends on their faith and their loyal association with the earthly part of Jehovah's universal organization." End quote. And there it is. Anyone who's been a witness for any amount of time knows that you just mention a few things, the typicals, anti-typicals, and we've got ourselves something that flows off the tongue of every witness. The organization was a lot like Noah's Ark. That nifty ark that Noah built to carry all of the animal species, insects, plants, and mountains of poop was actually just a symbol for Jehovah's organization in the last days that now overlap and never really seem to end, with even the door to the ark, otherwise known as Jehovah's modern-day organization, now remaining open for last-second stragglers during the Great Tribulation. Thank you, annual meeting of 2023. No word yet on why Noah bothered preaching by his lonesome and without publications and book carts from an organization, which is fitting because as of the annual meeting, no one knows why Jehovah's Witnesses even bother to preach anymore, since anyone and everyone can climb into that ark when there is visible proof that his organization is the only good one left. Just learn this. No one can answer these basic questions. They have been pointing to a child story as both visible proof he had an organization, as well as a symbol, or making it a symbol for their modern day organization, and they've been doing this for decades. It's one of my favorite stories. It gets a lot of mileage on this program. But listen, when it comes to truly thinking about all things organization and the bold claims they make about it, it didn't take my adolescent mind long to wonder, wait a minute. If Jehovah has always had an organization, why wasn't Noah part of it? Why wasn't he already part of an organization? And why did he only talk to Noah about building an ark? Why didn't Jehovah talk to his organization? Why did Noah, allegedly, have to preach to the rest of the planet? Didn't people know about Jehovah's organization already? Why didn't Noah's family seem to remind Noah about Jehovah's organization, that they were, obviously all part of. Wasn't Noah pushing ahead of the organization by building arks and chasing tigers and hippos? Did he go over the questions with his sons and their wives before getting drunk that one last time? Listen, so many questions. Yeah, I'm being sarcastic. But we've already heard the bold claim that Jehovah has always had an organization. We got nothing to go on here, though, aside from what the 9 guys in upstate New York just tell us as a fact. The Bible itself never mentions an organization. Obviously, Noah would have been part of it, right? Seems to make sense. Adam and Eve never said a word. Neither did Abel. Neither did Enoch. And then, a few other people leading up to my guy, Noah. No mention of an organization. But I'll be damned if today's organization isn't just like Noah's Ark. Run into it and be saved. But if you're a thinking person and using just the Bible, this is where it began to turn my own thoughts in my head into knots. And I'm just going to give this one to Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm going to give them one. Roughly 2,500 years after the Garden Party, and with zero mention of an organization during that time, Jehovah did seem to create and build what might be considered an organization. We're going to give them this one. And that organization was the nation of Israel. Where the organization that Jehovah had on earth was from the book of Genesis up until Israel was established, well, don't ask that question. I did. It's a mistake. No one has the answer to it. Albeit it's a really strange way to start an organized people, this Israel thing. He once again makes a promise to one man, just one man, Abraham, raising questions as to why Abraham didn't know Jehovah already had an organization. Was Abraham part of one? No, you say? According to the governing body, that is. But let's pretend to not answer that question. Sort of like the governing body does. We are just following their example after all. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Jews are born. Boom. Jehovah's organization is then really tossed about. Jehovah's organization on earth, if you want to call Israel that, is then taken into slavery, in Egypt, creating a ton of questions as to how great the organization is after all. So Jehovah then sends a guy named Moses, himself an Egyptian prince, and obviously at that point not part of this organization that exists that we don't know exists, to rescue all the Jews. He sends Moses. Moses lays down some commandments for his organization, apparently not referencing whatever commandments Jehovah already had in place since the Garden of Eden organization that no one knows what it's called or who was part of it. I think you can see where I'm going here. But if you want to call Israel an organization without going into all the historicity and everything else that comes with it, I'm going to give you that one. But if you're going there and Israel was Jehovah's earthly organization, from there, a Jehovah's Witness is to believe that his organization, frankly, it wasn't too hot. It wasn't a really good one. It has a long line of judges, kings, and prophets going sideways, burning babies, at one point worshiping giant penises, marrying people outside the organization, killing everyone that didn't like their organization, and then even splitting their organization into 2 organizations. You remember, the northern 10-tribe kingdom and the southern 2-tribe kingdom. All while Jehovah watched on like the boss that he is, but still claiming, according to the governing body, that this was a great example of his organization, and it was all very organized. In fact, the Watchtower of November 2016, page 9 says this, quote, "The people of ancient Israel were a model of organization." End quote. And to that, I can only say, were they now? Were they? Brothers selling brothers into slavery, guys being murdered by other guys in the organization, Saul the king throwing spears at people, on and on. In one major plot twist, Jehovah can be talked into changing his organization. You might remember the people wanted a human king because apparently the invisible Jehovah just wasn't cutting it here on earth. So Jehovah allowed them to talk him into making earthly guys with equal authority kings in his organization. Odd, no? Am I the only one that finds that odd? We don't like the CEO. We want guys we can see. On second thought, it was a lot like the Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, now that I think about it. Ugh. But just ask a Jehovah's Witness about this concept of organization. They'll point to Israel and claim that there's your proof. And I have to say, what an example. Jehovah clearly didn't have an HR department during this time period in his organization. Can anyone but me imagine the size of King David's file? Can you imagine the file they had on David at the HR department in the organization? What a guy. But from there and without explanation, in the history of all things Jehovah's organization that has always existed, we're told, Jehovah's org drops into one of several, I guess, for lack of a better term, we'll call them voids throughout the centuries, where no one knows where it went or who was actually running it. It then reappears when Jesus arrives on the earth. According to Jehovah's Witness leadership in 2024, Jesus then created the Christian organization and set up what he calls, or what they call, pardon me, the original governing body, minus the printing operations, otherwise known to the rest of us as Jesus' 12 apostles. And here's where Jehovah's organization gets really mysterious. The last of his apostles, the apostle John, dies sometime after 98 AD, being the only apostle, I might add, to not die a martyr, something the current governing body of J-Dubs can relate to, because they send other Jehovah's Witnesses to their deaths in their place. It all seems to line up, right? But watching on from heaven, I'm sure Peter, James, Matthew, Andrew, and the rest of them all wonder why they got the short end of the stick in Jehovah's organization by actually having to be martyred and killed. Stay tuned. The governing body today, they avoid that whole mess. But back to the historicity. With John gone off the scene, more questions begin when it comes to the organization. Things like, I don't know, where was Jehovah's organization when John died? Why don't we know anything about Jehovah's organization from 98 AD to 1879 of the 19th century? There's a few centuries in there where we know nothing. What were people doing during this time in his organization? Why can't we find anyone in history who knows what we are talking about? Why did he wait until 1971 to appoint the governing body? Then in 2013 to claim the governing body was the faithful and discreet slave after all, after decades of saying it was all of the anointed? Any answers? Did the organization take a coffee break for almost 1,800 years? Because we've got nothing. And that includes from the governing body. Despite publications by Jehovah's Witnesses, videos that they make really slick, the Proclaimer's book that they've suddenly hidden somewhere in the basement, all trying to say that people, writers, translators, people that had nothing to do with Jehovah's Witnesses might have possibly kind of sort of been part of Jehovah's organization during that time. An organization they themselves didn't know they were a part of. Oh, man. But wow. Does this whole organization thing get weird around 1879 when we are introduced to the leader of the organization, Chuck Taze Russell, the guy who loved pyramids and miracle wheat. He was chosen out of the mothballed organization we know nothing about to be the leader of an organization suddenly we'd all know about. And much like the guys in the Bible that came before him, Chuck, he had an odd relationship with the organization. You see, despite the claim it's always been here in one form or another since the Garden of Eden, Chuck, well, is it weird that he had to create an organization that we're told already existed? Wait a minute here. Why did Charles Taze Russell ever have to create an organization if Jehovah always had one? Why didn't he just join Jehovah's organization in the 1870s? Wait, you say there wasn't one? No way. Not possible. The faithful slave tells me my father always had an organization. But I got to tell you, in one weird move no one can explain, not only did Chuck Russell have to create the organization because Jehovah loved him a lot but wouldn't tell him where to find the one that already existed, then Chuck says he puts to print, and I don't even know how to explain this. It gets very, very awkward. He says to beware of anything called an organization. Didn't he create what? Wait a minute. From Zion's Watchtower of 1895, page 216, Charles Taze Russell said this, quote, "Beware of organization. It is wholly unnecessary. The Bible will be the only rules you need. Do not seek to bind others' consciences and do not permit others to bind yours. Believe and obey so far as you can understand God's word today, and so continue to growing in grace and knowledge day by day." End quote. Does that strike anyone but me as odd on this concept of organization? Not only did the only man on earth Jehovah was using say you don't need an organization, he actually put it to print in the Watchtower. You remember that magazine, right? That we should be very, very skeptical about organizations, and he even warned people. He warned us that they weren't necessary. Not only was he not part of the organization that apparently existed, he had to create one even though one existed, and then he created one even despite warning us to never get involved with one. What the hell is going on here? What is going on? How awkward. He takes a shot at Jehovah's organization, and then he goes out and has to create one because one wasn't. It's just a brain bender. A hearty welcome to the International Bible Students and the Watchtower Society. Don't need one. I think I'll make one anyway because the one we are told has always existed has never existed. That's right. This concept of organization was summarized in that brief comment. Chuck Taze Russell went on to say this, The Millennial Dawn, the New Creation, 1904, page 74, quote, "The test of membership in the new creation will not be membership in any earthly organization, but union with the Lord as a member of his mystical body." End quote. Of course, not to be missed is that even good old Chuck eventually started claiming that he personally was all the people needed if they wanted to know Jehovah. Does this sound familiar to you? Does this sound familiar? For anyone who is able to visit his gravesite, they can see his headstone where he claimed to be the Laodicean messenger. The pyramid that was propped up there a few feet away has since been torn down by the society. Imagine that. It became a pilgrimage for us mentally diseased apostates. But Chuck, just to summarize, I apologize for the repetition. But for emphasis, see what I did there? I will say this. Chuck was not part of an organization we're told has always existed. He then created an organization after warning us that we should never be part of an organization. If that wasn't weird enough, check out what happened with Chuck in 6 short years. The Watchtower, September 15th, 1910, the reprints on page 344 tell us this, quote, "Furthermore, Not only do we find that people cannot see the divine plan in studying the Bible by itself, you might remember he said all you ever needed was the Bible, switched gears in 6 years. We know this if we're ever a witness. This is all familiar. Back to the quote. But we see also that if anyone lays the scripture studies aside, you might remember them, he wrote those books, even after he has used them, after he has become familiar with them, after he has read them for 10 years, if he then lays them aside and ignores them and goes to the Bible alone, though he has understood his Bible for 10 years, our experience shows that within 2 years, he goes into darkness. On the other hand, if he had earnest heed to the opportunities for service and consider that merely reading the scripture studies with their references and had not read a page of the Bible as such, he would be in the light at the end of the 2 years because he would have the light of the scriptures. End quote. You heard that correctly. On All Things Organization, somewhere in a 6-year span, Chuck Taze Russell went from a guy without an organization, warning against organizations, to creating one, and then even saying the Bible. If you tried to read that alone, you'd slip into darkness. You would, however, find the light if you read the books he wrote. Remind you of anyone you can think of? Much like Moses drawing water from a rock, eventually running Jehovah's organization goes to your head. That's it. It's undeniable. And after all that brings us up to more modern times over the past century plus. Chuck dies. Judge Joe Rutherford wrestles away control of Jehovah's organization because, that's how Jehovah rolls. It's his organization. Just try to ignore his love for corporate takeovers and legal battles, or how it all resembles the talking snake in that little garden story. Wait a minute. And my former father's organization infrastructure continues to live on, much like the one Judge Joe produced. It's alive and well in 2024. Slight note, everyone is still a brother and a sister. Jehovah still needs your money. But hey, he now approves of the hair growing on your face, fellas. We did get that. And with all of that brief timeline and rambling historicity, behold, the Jehovah's Witness teaching on the importance of their organization. And it's painful. Do you know how many Jehovah's Witnesses know none of that? None of it. And I'm talking about Jehovah's Witnesses who have served the organization for decades. They don't know it. They don't know the history, most of it or all of it. And yet, like me from childhood, they're taught that the organization is everything and has always existed. Like most high control religions, it is on par with Jehovah and his son Jesus themselves. It should come as no surprise to anyone listening that the governing body has full authority to run Jehovah's organization, including the claim that you can't even know Jehovah unless you recognize that they alone get to tell you all about him. Again, despite centuries of them not existing, then suddenly popping onto the scene in 1971 and claiming Jesus' parables were about them all along. From Examining the Scriptures Daily, 2007, page 34, where we're told this, quote, Christ thus leads the congregation by means of the Spirit-anointed, faithful and discreet slave and its governing body. End quote. This organization is taking shape, is it not? From the Watchtower of 1990, March 15th, on page 20, it says this, quote, These overseers faithfully seek to apply instructions received from Jehovah God and Jesus Christ by means of the faithful and discreet slave and its governing body. End quote. That's a particularly powerful quote because you'll note that overseers and elders receive instructions from Jehovah and Jesus through the governing body, tying the governing body directly to God himself in this little organization. And finally, bringing it up to more recent times in a talk with the elders meeting with regular pioneers, special pioneers, and field missionaries, the outline from October of 2020, we are told this, quote, demonstrating trust in Jehovah also involves trusting his organization and those whom he is using to take the lead. Now, more than ever before, it is important to demonstrate complete trust in Jehovah. End quote. You see, just from those quotes, the guys in New York, there's now 9 of them, are in actuality the glue. They're the glue that holds the Almighty God's organization together. Just ask them. They're happy to tell you. And it was this, and it was here, that I personally really began to have questions that just couldn't be answered anymore. Not that they ever were, let's be honest. I read the Bible myself 7 times. I studied it, front to back. I got on airplanes. I went to museums. I looked at secular documents, you name it. But in the Bible itself, there is nothing in its pages, nothing, that suggests Jehovah has always had an organization. You won't find it. In fact, it was how he treated people one-on-one that was really what was most attractive about him to me personally, both as a kid and as an adult man. Jehovah of the Bible, the God of the Bible, deals with individuals. He even used individuals. You're not going to find where Enoch sent a letter to headquarters asking for permission to preach against the wicked people in his neighborhood. Joseph didn't wait to be approved by the governing body to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. Women didn't call Wallkill, New York to get permission to tell the apostles Jesus had been resurrected. On and on it goes. The concept of organization isn't there. It ain't there, folks. It is not in the Bible. And any attempt to try to tie it all together by means of an organization is nothing more than a reach. I have a favorite account in this regard, and I got to tell you, I used it on several shepherding calls back in the day, and at times, there was a couple of times it wasn't very popular, especially with my fellow elders. They wondered what I was getting at. And I couldn't help but think, yeah, when you read this account, can you just imagine standing there and hearing this for the first time? It must have felt, if it were real, a lot like it feels right now. And Mark chapter 9 and verses 38 through 42 of the New World Translation, we get an account that has long fascinated me. It goes something like this, quote, John said to him, Teacher, we saw a certain man expelling demons by the use of your name, and we tried to prevent him because he was not accompanying us. He hadn't been approved by the body of it. No, I added that. But Jesus said, back to the verse, do not try to prevent him, for there is no one that will do a powerful work on the basis of my name that will quickly be able to revile me. For he that is not against us is for us. For whoever gives you a cup of water to drink on the ground that you belong to Christ, I truly tell you, he will by no means lose his reward. But whoever stumbles one of these little ones that believe, it would be finer for him if a millstone, such as is turned by an ass, were put around his neck and he were actually pitched into the sea. End quote. In Jesus' own words, in the Bibles that Jehovah's Witnesses possess, Jesus himself praised someone working without an organization. He wasn't even working with Jesus. He just believed in him. He didn't even have Jesus' permission, much less filled out an application to be a pioneer. He didn't do it. It's not there. And when the apostles questioned it, Jesus said, "Why are you worrying about this? If he's not against us, he's for us. This is a good thing." No mention of infrastructure, org charts, or who had to approve this man witnessing. The apostles were a lot like the modern day guys. Hey, he's working outside the lines. Jesus, it's okay. It's okay. Somehow this organization, and in particular the leadership, has turned the God that I considered my father into some sort of codependent, ambivalent, prone to laziness God that somehow needed them to talk to his creation on this planet. His book was apparently poorly written, so he had them then write the Watchtower and Awake magazine. People couldn't gather together to visit and encourage each other unless it was in a kingdom hall that they oddly had to pay for themselves to build so that they could meet because they were told they had to. My dedication, something so intimate and personal, came down to a question that I had to say yes to that included my allegiance to an organization. All of it neutering Jehovah. And it's not debatable. But that's what the governing body and the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses has done. And they've done all of this without a shred of evidence in the Bible that Jehovah has ever been using an organization since he flipped the sun on for Adam. The Bible simply doesn't support the Jehovah's Witness teaching on the necessity for an organization. It ain't there. You're not going to find it. For someone who does believe in God and his Son, the Bible states plainly and so simply what it takes to have a relationship with them and, oh, by the way, also live forever. At John chapter 17 and verse 3 of the New World Translation, it's one of those every witness memorizes at a very young age. We are told this, quote, "This means everlasting life. They're taking in knowledge of you, the only true God, and of the one whom you sent forth, Jesus Christ." End quote. You'll note that despite the claims of the governing body, there's no mention of an organization. There's no mention of them. You are to only know Jehovah and Jesus Christ in this perfect little instruction manual he had made for you. But it continues. In John chapter 3, verses 16 and verse 36 of the New World Translation, we are told this, quote, "For God loved the world so much that he gave his only begotten Son, in order that everyone exercising faith in him might not be destroyed, but have everlasting life. He that exercises faith in the Son has everlasting life." End quote. I've read that a few times. No mention of an organization. And one more for good measure at 1 Corinthians 3:21. We got to get that fuzzy guy, Apostle Paul, involved. Of the New World Translation says this, quote, "Hence, let no one be boasting in men. For all things belong to you, whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas or the world or life or death or things now here or things to come. All things belong to you. In turn, you belong to Christ. Christ in turn belongs to God." End quote. God in turn belongs to his organization. No, it's not there. And you now see why I had so many questions regarding the only Father I had ever known. Did he say all we needed was faith in his Son? Wasn't his Son's sacrifice enough? Why would he leave out messaging to me and everyone else on this organization thing? Why didn't Jesus mention an organization? Hey, I got one. What was the organization when Jesus arrived? Was it the apostate Jews? The answers became obvious to me. I didn't need a website. I didn't need an apostate friend. I didn't need bad association. I didn't need anything. I just picked up the Bible and the answers become obvious. But out of respect, I'm going to let the listener come to their own conclusion on that, because I really, truly believe it's a journey that each person has to take on their own. Jehovah's Witnesses spend the greater part of their worship listening to how they need to be loyal to an organization that the Bible never mentions. Every meeting part, every video, the emphasis is on one thing: the organization. They have a broadcasting studio now. They're building theme parks where you can go and read about things or view things that you can read about in the Bible. It's mind-blowing propaganda aimed at supporting 9 guys in particular that reside in upstate New York. And when anyone starts to question it, they're told the answer is to, are you ready for this? Get more involved with that organization. I know it shocks you. From the Watchtower of 1998, June 15th, pages 12 through 16, the articles, "Do You Appreciate Jehovah's Organization?" tells us this, quote, "Therefore, if we truly want to perceive and appreciate Jehovah's organization, we must look to the heavens. And therein lies a problem for some. Since Jehovah's heavenly organization is invisible, how do we know that it really exists?" That's a good question. Some may even pass through a tunnel of doubt, wondering, how can we be sure? Well, how can faith overcome doubt? Waiting for the answer, back to the quote, 2 key ways are intense personal study of God's Word and regular attendance at and involvement in Christian meetings. That's right, the organization. Then we see the light of truth at the end of the tunnel. End quote. So this concept and this messaging that continually comes to a witness, and a witness that may be, I don't know, doubting that this organization, they're looking for an answer. They're looking for something to base their faith on. The answer comes to us from the faithful slave, and the answer is spend more time with the organization. In the perfect circular reasoning that gets people into the deepest malaise you'll ever witness. We are all familiar with what it feels like to sit there knowing, we just know that something is off. Something doesn't feel right. It's off. But not quite being able to put our finger on it. For those that approach the elders wanting some proof on this whole organization thing, the elders can't offer any proof. However, they quickly turn to asking you if you believe this is God's organization or if the governing body is indeed the faithful slave. That's how it works. I'm doubting this. I don't even see this. I can't find it in the Bible. Oh, is that so? Says the elders. Are you doubting? Do you not believe this is God's organization? Do you not believe the governing body? They're not trying to help you, folks. They're trying to see if they have the opportunity to label you an apostate. That's all it is. Many Jehovah's Witnesses slink back to their seat at the Kingdom Hall with their mouth shut, only to have their doubts answered with the following type of reasoning. From the April 2023 Watchtower Study Edition, page 9, we get this, quote, "If we're not organized, we would not be able to accomplish the work Jesus has assigned us to do. Suppose, for example, that there were no territory assignments. Everyone could preach wherever they wanted. Some territories might be worked over and over by a number of different publishers, while other territories might be neglected entirely." End quote. So if you're following along at home, you're trying to wrap your head around this concept of organization. You're asked if you believe it. Well, I'm clearly having doubts, but you slink away only to be told that, well, organization is necessary. We have to have this. Can you imagine going out service without organized territories? With the thinking person thinking, aren't we supposed to preach wherever we want? Isn't that the idea? What did the apostles ever do without a territory map? Were they lost? They had to be. They weren't organized in an organization. Who was keeping track of return visits after all? It's that type of insulting diatribe that a witness is faced with, along with the thought that somehow an organization has always existed when you can clearly see it hasn't. But listen, how about just one more thing to consider when it comes to Jehovah having an organization? It's a personal favorite. The Watchtower of October 1st, 1967, page 587, has this to say. Oh, it's so humbling. Quote, "Thus, the Bible is an organizational book and belongs to the Christian congregation as an organization, not to individuals, regardless of how sincerely they may believe that they can interpret the Bible. For this reason, the Bible cannot be properly understood without Jehovah's visible organization in mind." End quote. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? The instruction manual to all of mankind that has an estimated 2.5 billion copies in print since just 1974, that understandable to an estimated 8 million people on the planet. And I gotta tell you, that's generous because we all know Jehovah's Witnesses don't always read their Bible. Many of them have never read it. But it's only understandable to them because they are associated with the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses. No individual can understand it. Anyone can get a Bible, they can read it, but you'll never understand it because you're not in their organization. And as they stated in that quote, it's an organizational book anyway. Those 10 commandments are tricky to understand after all. They're very tricky, very complex. Or how about Deuteronomy 23, 12, and 13, where we get instructions on how to dig a hole, take a poop, then cover it with dirt. Very complex. You simply cannot understand it. Forget about it. You're missing something in those deep instructions in God's book. You need their organization to understand the Bible. It's an exhausting, mind-numbingly stupid set of teachings that have trapped millions of people. An organization. If this isn't enough for someone to question this entire concept and why Jehovah of the Bible needed one to begin with, then I have to say something blunt and bold that's not going to be popular. I believe you've chosen a path of ignorance. And I'm sorry if that sounds harsh, but you simply can't say that the Almighty, who created the molecule, needed these guys to get the job done. There's no way you can reason on it. But they continue to claim that that is in fact the case. You need them. From the Watchtower of 2006, July 15th, pages 19 through 23, the articles focus on the goodness of Jehovah's organization. Seems to be implying there's some badness. Just going to leave it right there. The quote, "A positive spirit will also enable us to bear in mind the many blessings we enjoy because of being associated with the earthly part of Jehovah's organization. This is the only organization in the world that is loyal to the sovereign of the universe." How do you feel about that reality and the privilege of engaging in the worship of the only true God, Jehovah? End quote. Only them. Only them. Organization. It's everywhere. And you're going to love it. You're going to be in it. You're going to participate in it. Or else. Every other organization on earth, no matter what they're doing, no matter what you can visibly see they do to help people, is fit for fireballs and burnt bird food any second now. But I want to bring you back to one of their favorite illustrations. I touched on it earlier. The earthly organization of Jehovah's Witnesses is said to be like Noah's Ark, a safe place representing their future hope, the new system of things. The problem here is we can all visibly see that the ark has been taking on water in recent decades. Lots of water. Water in the form of lawsuits dealing with abused children. Water in the form of endless begging for more money. Water with more changes to doctrines and the repetitive fear-mongering. Even being exposed to those that have inexplicably jumped overboard, leaving the ark. Oddly, Noah didn't have anyone jump overboard, so there's that, but we'll stay away from it. All of this leads back to my own story. My own questions about Jehovah, the only father I really ever had. Why, in my mind, I asked, why did you forget to mention this organization thing in the book that apparently is an organizational book? Why is your organization constantly changing? Why did your chosen guy, Chuck Russell, warn us to not get involved with an organization only then to create one himself? And I have to tell you, those questions were never answered. No one was ever able to answer them. And you can bet that I stopped asking them. But the truth is, somewhere along the way, I landed on the answer. Outside of a brief time with Israel, I'm just going to give you that one. It's really debatable. The God of the Bible has never had an organization. He dealt with individuals, not an org chart. But I got to tell you, now's a special time. His organization, in many ways, appears to be sinking. His 9 guys are patching holes in the figurative ark as quickly as they can, albeit they're doing it with some fancy new beards. But I'm watching. What will Jehovah do? After all, we're told the creator of the molecule in DNA needs this organization. And when I open his book, all I can find is that Jesus, the guy he sent, his own son, said it best. And Matthew 19 and verse 26 of the New World Translation, where he said this, quote, looking at them intently, Jesus said to them, with men, this is impossible. But with God, all things are possible. End quote. Evidently. I want to thank you all for joining me this week. Wherever you may be well.